Hello, every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a little bit of a history lesson here today. What I wanted to actually go over was the various little mechanics that Unicorn Overlord does, the various little things that it does to basically bring back and improve upon the Ogre Battle formula. For those that have never played those games, don't worry, you don't need to play them for context, and in many cases I would say actually start here and then maybe go backwards, because... So, okay, we're going to need a little bit of history on all this, because when it comes to the Ogre Battle games, they are a very, very strange collection of mechanics. They're a very unique type of strategy that has, frankly, never really been attempted in the same way up until Unicorn showed up here, and even then there were a lot of things that were actually changed. So I'm going to be going over the original games in this video, but I wanted to show a few things here while we still have Overlord here on the screen. So, for context, there were 3 Ogre Battle games that existed before, and various ports of those particular ones. What you need to know primarily of those different versions, basically there's March of the Black Queen, that's like the classic version. The original SNES classic is awesome. The PS1 version improved on it in a lot of ways with quality of life features and things like that. Like one of the issues the original had was that it never told you what a lot of things did. So the PS1 version is generally the one I recommend for folks to go into. And then at the same time, they also had it ported to the Saturn by a completely different team. And those guys ended up putting in a whole slew of different features. Funnily enough, many of those features later came to color the experience for Ogre Battle 64, which again is a weird tangent to go into here. But what I wanted to mention is that right off the bat, we actually see a lot of references to this. While many of the unit types are similar, this particular 2x3 grid is kind of its bread and butter. It's the thing that it started. It's what made its strategy work. They had your front row, your back row, and then you'd swap people around in the middle of fights. When you got into engagements, you had technically a little bit more freedom than you do in Unicorn, for better or worse. You could retreat at any time, but you would take a penalty to your charisma and your alignment. There were like personality systems to go over there. And at the same time, you had cards that you could deploy in the middle of fights. We'll be showing those off in just a minute, but this 2x3 pattern was for the purpose of going and shuffling units around. So, like, the original kind of spear unit there was the Valkyrie, somebody that would essentially be a spear poker in the front row and would be a caster in the back. And in this version, we see them come back as a spear poker wherever you put them, and a javelin thrower with other skills that you can add on top. So March of the Black Queen didn't have all of these skills and things going on. This is more, oddly enough, of a massive evolution over the Ogre Battle 64 formula, which we'll get to in a moment. But as far as equipment goes, in the original Black Queen, you could give everybody 1 item. Each character could carry 1 item with them, and it would change their properties. A lot of times, it didn't necessarily tell you exactly what they did, and in a lot of cases, it didn't make sense that they could use it. For example, you could get a Divine Battle Axe and give it to your dragon, who now can instantly kill undead because it's technically divine. How he's using it is anyone's guess, but either way, he, I guess, just kind of toothpicks that thing and just bites ghosts now. Anyway, there was a big emphasis on just weird unit types, and if you ever wondered about the box art that's available right in the intro there, actually we should see it in the title menu, I think here. But this original title menu is a reference to March of the Black Queen. The original had, here, it's going to show it here. The original had giants where the gladiator is. The spear people were the Valkyries. The angels were still the angels. The cavalry were dragons. The witches were still witches. The clerics were still clerics. They had ankhs instead of maces and stuff like that. But this is almost a direct one-to-one. And actually, the werewolf that we see in the back there is another very beautiful little touch. March of the Black Queen was the only time the Ogre series ever had werewolves for whatever reason, and they went just crazy with it. So they had werewolves, they had were-tigers, they had all this other stuff. And actually there was another little reference to this as well. If you go over to your heraldry, I'm sure that this will continue being the case later on as well. But if you go over and look over at your heraldry options, you'll notice that there are mermaids with tridents. If you again saw any Ogre fans getting super excited about this, that's because those are March of the Black Queen mermaids, basically. In the Ogre series, they always were running around with tridents. So, granted, that's more of a general having mermaids with tridents isn't exactly the newest thing in the world, but still, it's like one of its main things there. Like mermaids with the spears and tridents are one of the main factions in the early Ogre Battle games. Ironically enough, despite them being around for a good chunk of the series, in fact more than half of the series, they're almost completely unknown for the series outside of that. The most popular entry in the series, Tactics Ogre, well, now Reborn, but originally it was Let Us Cling Together or Wheel of Fate. In those particular entries, there were no mermaids whatsoever, and the kind of sort of antagonist of those is kind of implied to have partially had a hand in their genocide. So, either way, they didn't make it so good. But either way, we don't see the mermaids much through the series, but for the Ogre Battle games, they always had some variant of this, and that's awesome. They also had it in the GBA game, Tactics Ogre Knight of Lotus, where they were one of the main factions, and you were that guy that could potentially have been involved in their genocide, or be their friend. Dude's girlfriend is literally raised by mermaids. It's a whole thing. Anyway, let's get back to it, though. So, okay. What's funny is our selections of different units here will also kind of convey a few things. These the old Griffin Knights and things, the way that they handled mount bonuses, or leadership bonuses rather, is actually an interesting middle ground between the systems between both of those two games. See, March of the Black Queen was very board game-esque. It was very open in its systems, so when it came to something like Griffins, you were started off with a few griffins and a few octopi in your party at the very beginning of the game. And the way that this worked was that they would just simply be on your team, and you could throw them into any party. The party would always default to whatever the highest movement type was, which for some reason was swimming. But right under that was flying. And if you had a unit that was flying, so for example a Griffin or a Hawkman or an Angel or something like that, and you threw them inside your team, that team can now fly, and their movement is like 4 times faster than anything else. The technical, like, fastest movement was a swimming unit in the water, which is probably why they were classed as the highest. But either way, the sort of meta, quote-unquote, was to always have at least one person in your team. And the teams worked a little differently in that one as well. Where you could have up to 5-man squads. In this case, obviously, we can go up to 10, apparently. But you had up to 5-man squads. And the big units took 2. So, like, one of the squads that I personally really liked running was using 2 of those heavy units, those Griffins, along with a Witch that had really high speed. So the speed is basically like the priority in this one, and it's great to actually see an almost comeback of this particular mechanic here through, I saw some combinations of Witches and Griffin Knights, where you basically use the Witches to go freeze somebody, and then you use that in combination with a freezing item on the Griffin to basically stun lock a squad before they can act. This was such a peak March of the Black Queen build, and I love that it's back. So what you do in that one is that the Witches in March of the Black Queen basically were walking flashbangs. They could do no damage, but at the start of the fight, if you had one that was fast enough, they would use Ray of Paralysis, which would just stun the entire party. If their stats were good enough, if their speed was good enough, they would just end up stunning the entire party, and then those Griffins, which were basically boosting the movement speed of the team, would then go and essentially just do some chip damage, and it would technically count as a win. They would repeatedly be able to push enemies away, essentially playing defensively while almost being a pacifist team. It was really, really cool. Anyway, so in that particular case, though, one thing that was different, and one thing that they actually freed up a little bit in Unicorn, was that they actually they would have different roles depending on the lane that they were in. So, like, for example, a front row knight would be able to swing twice, but if they were in the back, they could only swing once. To some degree, the intent there was that you would, for example, set up a crit build, and it would knock somebody backwards and reduce their offense. In theory, it worked that way. In practice, it was, I mean, it was cool, I guess. was a little unclear how it went sometimes. And it seemed like the intent was for them to be able to ambush parties from the back sometime. So, for example, units like the Valkyrie in that one were valuable in their ability to switch between lanes without having any kind of any issues. So like if somebody was wounded and you knew that the party in front of you would have a hard time reaching your back row, you could swap out your wounded units for your back row and they might be able to function a little bit better. However, like March of the Black Queen, losing your units doesn't actually wipe them out in the long run. You just get them back. And in Unicorn's case, you don't even take an experience loss. Black Queen's thing was that they would just completely wipe out the entire XP bar. In this particular respect, I have to say I prefer Unicorn's approach on this. As much as wiping out that XP bar seems like it would be a balancing out penalty, ultimately it just kind of ended up being annoying. In this case, you have a longer build-up for each consecutive level. So losing that XP bar would be dramatically more of an issue in this version. Basically back in March of the Black Queen, usually if you encountered a unit that was equal or higher level to you, you oftentimes would just get an automatic level upon winning. So losing experience was more of just a haha, your unit was about to level up and now they don't get to level up anymore. Don't you love that lost experience? So I have to say, in that respect, this is feeling better. But what's funny is that you may have seen some uproar over permadeath, and this is because in Ogre Battle 64 there was permadeath for your units. What's interesting is there was actually a whole economy based on permadeath in that game, where you would actually not be able to recruit units outside of story events and would have to train up soldiers on your own. But we'll get to that in just a moment. So anyways, let me just cover a few things here while they're visually available to at least show some of these things. I think this is going to show the fireworks effect, I hope. But whenever you complete a full delivery, I don't know if it's going to show it right here. Is it going to do the fireworks? Yes. So this fireworks effect, if you've seen any Ogre Battle fans getting hyper excited about this, that was the map victory kind of scene that would play out whenever you captured a town in the Ogre Battle games. That you would have you just focus in on the town and it would start shooting out fireworks. Like, it's the little things, you just gotta appreciate the little touches. Okay. Also, as far as equipment goes, I mean, hell, a lot of the equipment allowing you to do different stuff, like switching over to magic attacks and things like that, is, again, just a very Ogre Battle feeling kind of thing, which, I mean, it's just good design in this case. So you love to see that kind of stuff, but let's go ahead and get into March of the Black Queen proper to start showing some of those things so that we can see some of this stuff. I think I actually mentioned this earlier. But there was actually even one particular encounter, kind of over here-ish, that this area looks very similar to one of the Ogre Battle 64 maps, with one very trolly encounter that's similarly just kind of very instantly able to shut down rookie squads. I don't know that that's a reference, but I choose to believe that it is. Alrighty, so we'll begin our little adventure here on the PS1 version of March of the Black Queen. Personally, again, my favorite. I love the fact that the Saturn version had hard mode, and the fact that they added colorization and stuff like that to it. But here's the thing: the version on the PS1 added a feature that I feel is kind of, maybe not directly referenced, but I feel like it is referenced in Unicorn Overlord. And that's your ability to get unique color combinations on your different characters. So what's funny is that between the different versions of March of the Black Queen, the original SNES version just had your original kind of team here, Here, who do we want to use? I'm going to assume this one's probably got some stuff. I've had a lot of different save files for this thing over the years, and some of them got lost, some didn't. We'll see. In fact, it's a little bit of a frustrating thing that I ended up losing some of my save files for Ogre Battle 64 because I was hoping to use the old fairy run. Did a fairy-only Iron Man run a while ago. Anyway, so let's go ahead and look at this here. So when it comes to your different people, the PS1 version was unique in that it actually allowed you to recolor your people, your main character included, depending on who they were. So, for example, I had an ice version of the starting Lord here. So in her case, she's got more of a blue colorization to her. Or let's say we Let's see, who's got some stuff? You're just a generic dude. Who's got some different colors here? I want to say I had, not Eustace, I had one of these guys. Oh yeah, Gilbert. So like Gilbert, normally when you get a Black Knight, they would be, there would be slightly different colors. He's coming in with like a black and gold. He's got his trimmed gold armor from RuneScape or something. But like this is one of those cases that I was talking about, where you can get one kind of item per character that will just affect their stats and other attributes in some way. Sometimes it will just change their element type, sometimes it'll change a few other things, but still. So, as far as units and their similarities, you might have noticed that the helmets on the gladiators oftentimes will look a lot like this. That's because basically they're functioning the same role of being a guy that's supposed to be able to hit 3 units, while also having reasonably high bulk to go absorb hits. They actually were not very good back in this day, but still, the idea was there, you know? You have your Valkyries basically serving as those basic soldiers there. Interestingly enough, we had these doll mages. These changed a ton in Ogre Battle 64, but these were basically AoE casters that you could get right away, and their magic, for whatever reason, counted as a physical hit. By the way, complete and utter tangent of a tangent of a tangent. If you ever wondered why the Warlock specializes in neutral non-elemental damage in the One Vision mod for Tactics Ogre, it seems to be a reference to this. Anyway. So, okay, so as far as March of the Black Queen, basically all of this stuff ended up, it ended up having a nice little aesthetic where it was a very board game aesthetic. You had your units that were relatively simple to raise up, and they would end up going and forming up squads, and those squads would try to take towns. Interestingly enough, the main focus wasn't actually the battles in this game. So Unicorn Overlord focuses in on the battle mechanics and refines the ever-loving bejesus out of them. But believe it or not, back with these ones, that wasn't the kind of overall purpose that they were going for. The idea behind Ogre Battle in general was that it was constantly judging everything you did. This was actually more of... what was that one game called? I forget. The experience in this game was generally more about trying to get out of the war with your humanity intact, so to speak, more so than actually winning it. It was pretty much a foregone conclusion that you would end up winning it, but it generally was kind of expected that you were going to have some trouble along the way. And you might notice that reputation meter on the top right. So one of the big mechanics in this version, if I can remember the controls, was this reputation meter, where if, for example, you took a town that liked the people that took that town, your reputation would end up improving, or if you made decisions that the people agreed with, you would end up going and actually liberating the town rather than capturing it. However, if you go to a town that, for example, the population absolutely hates whoever you sent there for one reason or another, you might have an issue where you simply don't have... you don't have any reputation to speak of as you go on. And you can absolutely beat this game as a despot. There's a bunch of different endings where you just become a complete tyrannical dictator and just take over the place by force. In fact, there's one where if you save the previous king and he decides that you need to go, he'll just have you assassinated at the very end. There's a lot of little things like this. To this game. It's one of these ones that's meant to be constantly replayed on account of this reputation mechanic, so it would just play out differently every time you went for it. And these fights would get pretty darn large. So like in this case, we're going to go ahead and take a few towns right away, and we're going to spread out all over the map, and every time that you took a town, you got a card. This ended up evolving into the stamina recovery mechanic in Unicorn Overlord. So you had card actions in this one, and these card actions would allow you to essentially throw out spells in the middle of fights. Alrighty, got jump scared by one of the kiddos getting up from their nap early. Anyway, so what I was saying about these different towns here, as well as the different card spells and things like that, you might have noticed our reputation dropped, because every character has an alignment and has a charisma. And so, for example, these guys prefer low charisma, low alignments. It's just a very crappy place, and they want to see crappy people. So, they probably weren't too happy with us showing up. But other towns will have different requirements. And in some cases, you would find yourself in a position where you're kind of put into this conundrum where you want to take towns, right? And you can't necessarily take territory in the middle of a fight because not necessarily because you physically can't, but because you're basically going to be at a bad position for doing so, where you're going to lose reputation, and if you lose reputation, you're locked out of some better outcomes and things like that. I mean, I say better. The actual kind of perfect quote-unquote route involves you kind of going and managing your reputation very closely, being at worse reputation sometimes, better reputation other times, and so on. But there's a big focus on this kind of like board game play in this particular one, where you're going and specifically sending out squads that hopefully can deal with certain things. There aren't really necessarily strengths and weaknesses. Everyone's just generally better in different situations, more so than directly countering each other. So, for example, wizards will have a variety of different spells, and they'll just pull out the best ones whenever they're facing something. It's like, apparently these guys... Actually, I should probably turn on the animation, shouldn't I? Before people get the wrong idea that this didn't have animations or something. It does have animations. Most of the time you would turn those off. Like, you know how you find yourself constantly pressing start in Unicorn Overlord? Yeah, back in this one, you would just turn the animations off because you would just get tired of seeing the same stuff over and over for hours on end. But you'll notice a lot of the same stuff matters. That encounters, units will encounter each other, you know, they'll have slight benefits over each other one way or another. I recall this team being somewhat overpowered because this was a no-heal challenge run. But you'll notice the ground that they're standing on is again denoted by where they are. Certain units are weak to certain types of attacks, though again, it doesn't really necessarily tell you outside of the manual. If you didn't read the manual, you just plain wouldn't know a lot of things. But there's a big emphasis on exploration and randomization in this one. So the way that it kept it replayable was that it would give you random items every playthrough. So you saw that unit Aisha over there, who is a pretty pink princess. Normally they would be a white one. It's only because her color palette is pink, so she is all pink. Anyway, so as far as all that went, you would end up getting items to promote people in different situations. And also, when a squad has its leader killed, they will actually go and retreat back to base, for better or worse. So oftentimes this would give you the opportunity to go, let's say, swing a flyer around the back, and then, you know, maybe you'd potentially be able to finish off somebody that way. Like, we see that they're going to beeline towards their base, so we can send a squad over here to go intercept that. But there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. So you get those random items. Those will give you random class promotions. Like, you can get a Lich within the first few fights of the game. You might just never get one at all. And so there's constantly this, it's just like different situation that you're adapting to as the game carries on. So it leads to a lot of fun stuff. Also, by the way, one quick note that you'll note here is this guy will almost inevitably miss. One of the very few balance changes that they actually made in ports between different versions was to... Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, so, hippogriffs, or rather cockatrices, what should I say? So yeah, cockatrices, bizarrely enough, were actually just an evolution of the griffin in this one for some reason. And yeah, their petrification got severely nerfed, and that was a 10% chance, by the way. It got severely nerfed in the PS1 version, to the point where it hits only 10% of the time, and that's basically their only attack. It was weird, but surprisingly, they're still pretty decent. Anyway. So as far as this game's concerned, you're basically looking at the gameplay here. Like, you get different events depending on how you've kind of handled your encounters up to this point, and there's a lot of subversion of anime tropes. Everything you'll notice from the Ogre Battle games in general was that they're just... Similarly to me, why I get along with it, similarly has a just big ol' allergy to anime tropes. So, for example, there's the witch lady at the very start, and they're like, oh, look, I'm gonna, you know, mend my ways, I'm gonna be such a good person now, and then go turn over a new leaf and stop decapitating villagers and putting pumpkins on their heads. And sure enough, if you spare her, your reputation meter drops by half, because the local populace is pissed at why you would possibly give somebody like that a second chance. Like, oh, I'm sorry, she's pretty? That's your reasoning? You think they're going to turn over a leaf because they get pretty privilege? Is that how this goes? So, either way, It's got a lot of interesting interactions like that. And what's funny is that she'll actually then try to con you into spending a bunch of money on her, and if you don't get everything completely perfect, she'll just basically take your money and run. So there's a very cynical approach to a lot of things there. Anyway, so this was the formula of this one. It had that same 3x2 grid. However, you could stop and use items at any time in this one. You could also retreat away from fights at any time, but again, that would mess up your charisma and alignment. This may not matter depending on the classes that you're using. And additionally, certain classes would function better during the night or during the day. Something that I'm pretty sure we're actually going to see in Unicorn Overlord as well, because it does have that whole day-night mechanic thing going on. We saw werewolves. Interestingly enough, this one, I've never seen a game so hard in terms of making sure that you have a wide variety of were something or other is available. I think were tigers are the funniest thing, because they're just a slightly different recolor. Why bother? And yeah, you can only get more werewolves by essentially by getting a werewolf in the first place. So there's like one enemy that's a werewolf. You have to have a basic soldier go fight them, get attacked by them, survive their attack, and then there's a chance that they come back as a werewolf the next time that you look at them. Interruption later. I don't remember what on earth I was talking about. However, let's go ahead and cover one last note that I want to mention here on cards. So every time that you capture a city, sometimes you get an item, but every time you will get a card. And these card effects can be activated during fights. And what's funny is that a lot of these card effects are things that I would argue in Spirit anyway, kind of came back in Unicorn as well. So the reason that I say in Spirit is because this has been different every kind of in both iterations here, right? So like if we go over to these cards here, let's go ahead and start off a fight. And every one of these cards will do something different. So you can interrupt this at any time, and you can throw out one of these tarot effects. So like whoops, dang it, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, when I have it plugged in, the controls are a little bit jumpy sometimes, so... not to mention, I have the D-pad kind of also mapped to the right analog stick, which is right next to the face button, so sometimes I end up knocking that over as well. Either way, clumsy hands aside, let's go ahead and go over this real quick. So, got these different tarot cards, and these will tell you kind of give or take what they do. So, like the Fortune as well as the Fool cards will make an enemy leave. The Fool card will cause all units except for the leader to just abandon the leader and run away. The Fortune card will cause the enemy unit to run away, and things like that. And the kind of spiritual successor to this, to me anyway, feels like the combination of the Hallowed Cornash and the Barricades. The way that they both can be used to essentially just completely kick a party out of the fight feels very similar. You've got stuff like this, like Strength over here that's just going to improve defense. I mean, we already have that as a direct item. And we've got stuff like Defense that's kind of like the bomb items, which can essentially wipe out enemy units. So this also can be for some of the physical effects that you can throw out onto the field. Additionally, we've got Earthquakes to be called out that kind of can be, I guess, I'm sure there will be other moves that are similar to this, aside from Wild Swing, but just kind of a cool one there. Curing status ailments is already a thing, and anyhow, well, we haven't quite seen anything that moves enemies from the back to the front so far, at least I'm not off the top of my head. I'm sure there will be something similar. Basically, everything else has some sort of simile, and it doesn't seem like any accident. So, with that all being said, I'm going to go ahead and mention one more thing here for March of the Black Queen, and that was going to be the original AI system. This was definitely no Gambit system. The general idea was that you had Best, Strong, Leader, and Weak. So, Best would be whatever they considered optimal. So sometimes they would try to take out weak units that were generally considered a bit stronger. Strong would be attacking whatever has the most health. Leader would be trying to take out the leader. Weak would be trying to take out the lowest health units. There was more to this though. Like for example, oftentimes you'd keep them on strong because while trying to take out the highest health units, they also got a boost. I believe while attacking leader, they might have gotten a speed boost or something. There were little hidden boosts that it didn't tell you about to each of these different ones that gave them a little bit of an interesting feel. So Unicorn's a lot more open about a lot of its numbers. Generally, the Ogre series has always had this thing for keeping its numbers close to its chest and kind of letting you feel your way through the game. And oftentimes this was in an attempt to try to get you to roleplay in their particular systems more. It was a very tabletop first kind of experience. This is why, for example, even in this battle screen, you see that there's there's books and cups and things going on in the background. So either way, it's a cool aesthetic. But that being said, let's go ahead and march over to Ogre Battle 64 real quick to talk about some of those systems, and see you there. Alrighty, let's continue on with Ogre Battle 64, one of the most magical little oddities that you'll ever see. So, yeah, this, man, this game was nothing short of just an experimental, just wonder horse of strange ideas executed in interesting ways. So, okay, first and foremost, I want to point out the obvious similarity of the fact that it's also published by Atlas here. Personally, my headcanon for this whole situation is that Unicorn Overlord was basically like people's whole thing of just looking over the Ogre Battle games, and they're like, okay, people have been asking for another one of these for decades at this point. Like, honestly, it was a shock to me looking up the actual release date of this whole thing that this mess is almost 25 years old. Technically, actually 25 years old. Like, it's insane to me that it took this long for this this formula to make a comeback, but I'm assuming for legal reasons they couldn't make another one. That's probably the same reason that we haven't seen something like Night of Lotus or Ogre Battle 64 on a digital storefront. I mean, in Ogre Battle 64's case, the only time that it actually happened was on the Wii U, and in some places the Wii. And before that, we also technically also had the 3DS shop. Technically not before that, but aside from that, we also had the 3DS shop there, but only in Japan. The ones on the stateside could still run it just fine, just, yeah, we didn't get that information. So, let me just go ahead and say that there's a lot of mechanics from Ogre Battle 64 that we see going and making a comeback in Unicorn Overlord. First and foremost, with this beginning scene, all of these walls, you notice how similar this city looks, for one thing. For another thing, the multi-layered walls, and specifically the wall mechanics. You actually do fight through all of these walls in 64, so I'm sure we will in Overlord as well. But the actual wall mechanics are very similar. See, back in March of the Black Queen, you would use flyers to fly over walls if they existed. Otherwise, you just needed to find a way around them. You couldn't really get rid of all of your flyers unless you were intentionally trying to screw yourself there. So there was no need to bust through walls. So essentially what would happen is in March of the Black Queen, you would either fly over them or you would go and use a box of termites. No, I'm not kidding. For some reason, you would destroy stone walls with termites. Just Japan things, I guess. I don't know. But that never came back as a plot point ever anywhere, so whatever. Anyway, and if you're thinking, by the way, like, wow, Unicorn has an absolute ton of hidden content, again, very Ogre thing. I've gone over cliff notes of all of this stuff so far, but these are games that were intentionally built to essentially have a different narrative every time you played through. The overall, main story would be roughly the same, but who's on what side, how things end up playing out, and oftentimes entire battles themselves would just be entirely different on every repeat playthrough, giving you something different to play through. Like, for example, it's funny that whenever you look up save files, most of the save files that are available for OB64 are going to be things like, oh, all Zenobians, we've got all these specific characters unlocked, and there's not a single one up there that's just like, no, I didn't trust the Zenobians at all, they're all dead, it decided to go side with the demons because they set up a functional democracy in this one corner of the map, and honestly, I think we can replicate that somewhere else. Like maybe we just decided to go set up a romance between this archer and this werewolf. Like, it's just, there's different stuff that can play out all over the place, and it's looking like hopefully Unicorn will be doing a good bit of that as well, so we'll see. Anyway, we don't know for sure. Obviously, release date is just around the corner. 1 week to go. Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of politics to the Ogre games. There's a bit less of that for Unicorn. It seems to be mostly focused on the gameplay side of things. But what I was trying to get at with the walls here originally was the fact that busting through gates and fighting through multiple layered defenses and things like that, that is a very OB64 thing, so the way that we've seen it so far feels extremely similar. Additionally, one thing that I found really, really funny is Deneb. So this is that lady that we had the option to either kill or... Okay, note to self, remember to set it back to gamepad mode when on Steam Deck, or else it will kind of just, you know, turn off the emulator. So that's always good. Anyway, yeah. So, what I was going to say is, Deneb, this was that pretty witch lady that we had the option to either kill or attempt to recruit very awkwardly back in March of the Black Queen. She actually shows up in every one of these games in one way or another, and in this case, she's actually our tutorial. So, I want to point out something incredibly funny. I thought this was a really funny deep cut reference, but you know how in the tutorial for Unicorn Overlord, you have a unit that is basically a you know, a witch or a magi, you might say, that happens to be named Scarlett. Well, anyways, your tutorial in this game is effectively a witch here who is teaching you the ropes, who happens to be leading a squad. If we can go over to the right menu here, because the menus are admittedly extremely awkward in this game, who leads a squad called the Scarlet Magi. So, just a funny little deep cut there. But with that being said, the game essentially plays a little bit like, well, it's something you're already familiar with. It's going to play very similarly in terms of fights. However, instead of having specific units going and specifically attacking, you know, in the exact orders that you give them, the formula that this game used was that you instead had a 3x3 grid, and the items as well as the class that somebody used gave them different performance. So, for example, let's say you have a actually, are we even going to have any of the special items here? Maybe not. You know what? Let me go ahead and load up a different save file, see if I have something that's a better example here. So, every piece of equipment that you had potentially had another effect to it. So, rather than going and using those particular items, let's say something like this Blessed Sword is one of the items that you can randomly start with. Well, I say randomly. These games actually started off with a personality quiz that determined the stuff that you started the game with. So, like your starting party, the starting kind of co-commanders that you get, as well as some of your items. So, in this case, I started off with a Blessed Sword, which on the one hand is good against fighting undead things, but on the other hand can potentially be given to any unit that can use a sword for different properties. So, like in this case, by giving him the sword, instead of just having different amounts of slashes per each row, he got a healing effect in the back row, allowing him to basically be a healer. In this particular case, this was a Griffin-only challenge that's currently still ongoing, but this was one of the ways that you potentially could get around some of the weaknesses of your units. You still are looking at a situation that units are more directly strong, more so than having direct weaknesses, but this led to a lot of kind of fun changes that you could potentially do to your units. For example, you might have noticed that there was a lot of excitement over this big speedrun emphasis in Unicorn Overlord. Why was this? Because in Ogre Battle 64, this was similar. There were a lot of items that could modify your units that would essentially go up in price over time. The longer you took to get to those shops, the longer it would take for that to happen. So like you may notice that these casters over here all have the same spell by default, but by giving them different wands and different spells, you can have different effects coming out of this. And additionally, one of those things that I'm hoping will make a comeback, because it feels like everything else about OB64 did, is potentially combination attacks. So like, for example, in this one, if you gave them a certain, like, I think it's like Meteor or something like that, spell book that you could get by speedrunning Chapter 1, you would be able to modify their spell to be a essentially squad-wide AoE move instead of this poison debuff that she's got right here. Or a different wand might give her a different type of spell in her main slot as well. They have a certain kind of type of equipment that they start off with by default, and certain pieces of equipment will give them additional effects as well. Now, one of the things, again, that there was a bit of a downside to folks actually getting into this game is the fact that items and everything else were admittedly like really cool in concept, but very awkwardly implemented. So a lot of the menus are fairly confusing to get around. A lot of the items are a little unclear in terms of the stuff that they do. You usually just try a thing and then just kind of see what happens. Like, you know, Blessed Sword just says that it's blessed by a priest there, which doesn't necessarily tell you it's going to give you a healing effect, but, you know, it's fine. It's fine enough. And there's certain limitations in terms of your items. Like, for example, one of the few ways that you can actually resist petrification in this game is courtesy of a shield that you get from one of your talking events. So, like this guy over here, he left his town to go join us in the middle of one of the campaigns there. And in his case, if you go back after you've won a few fights, you talk to his mom, she'll be worried about him, and she'll give him the best shield in the game. So, way to go, Troy's mom. Anyway, yeah, best dude Troy, everyone's favorite little grunt guy. But anyways, you again got just interesting effects off your different pieces of equipment, and oftentimes they had entire side quests associated with them. You might notice that when it comes to their equipment, they all seem to have a particular kind of set of things that they happen to have by default. And one of the systems that was around in this game, if I can remember how to make this happen, is the fact that that each one of these characters will potentially have the option to change classes. However, for those class changes, they not only have to have the stat requirements, they also have to have the right equipment. So if they have neither of those, they just simply can't change to this other class. This is, again, a cool idea because they wanted them to have sort of default slots, and then you would upgrade those slots. In the case of Unicorn there, they just kind of have that stuff already, so they kind of circumvent that whole thing by just having them with that equipment. They don't change classes. Instead, they just sort of promote and essentially get other classes' skills through their equipment. But again, the Ogre games were all about switching around different classes for different things, for better or worse. There were certainly better implementations, certainly worse implementations. And one thing that I probably should mention is, with all of the experimental nature of this game, you might be wondering where this might have come from, considering the previous game that we looked at was mostly about the narrative and stuff like that. This one is still about the narrative, and just so you know, there's way more classes than this. This is just what this party has so far. But you have to understand two things. For one thing, this actually wasn't the original director. So that was Matsuno that had done the Tactics Ogre, the main Tactics Ogre game, as well as the original Ogre Battle. And then the other half of the series was done by a separate team. They did Ogre Battle 64, as well as Knight of Lotus. And then additionally, I'm sure somebody that was a little bit, at least like 99.9% stoned, made Prince of Zenobia. But either way, there's entirely different directions on each of these, because when it came to the Ogre games, each of them were going for a particular vibe, more so than a cohesive set of specific things that they stick to. So, like, you can change classes, but what those class changes mean is something different each and every time. So, like, back in March of the Black Queen, it was a way to unlock additional abilities on your units, but it also was just sort of a flavor thing. Sometimes it would give them new roles in different slots. They were very heavily emphasizing those two rows of different units. Whereas this time around, they would get different abilities from their equipment, and potentially instead of being alignment kind of interactions like we had back in March of the Black Queen, when they would take a city, you'd send the knights to go get the high charisma ones because they're the cool shiny ones, but you're going to go take a pirate city. You maybe go send in the berserkers, or you go send in your wizards or your ninjas and stuff. They might think that those are a bit cooler. It was a cool idea. It was a cool thing that would change the narrative, but it was kind of awkwardly conveyed, right? So what they did in 64 was they put a bigger emphasis on potentially unlocking towns by the fact that you got to that shop, and that shop had new items for people to get, which meant that you now got their equipment. There were potentially ways to get that kind of uniform set early, but oftentimes you'd have entire side quests dedicated to being able to get these pieces of equipment. Like, for example, the Dragoon class is something that's pretty difficult to get a hold of unless you just happen to convince one to join your side, where you have to do an entire side quest of collecting all the different pieces of equipment. You have to show up to particular places at particular days, bringing them particular types of metal that you also can only get on particular days, because the Dragoons have all been killed off. They're no longer relevant. There's not enough dragons to have a dragon slayer around as a general purpose profession, so you have to go out of your way to get it. There's a lot of hidden things all over the place in this game. But just so you know, there was a big emphasis on just making it replayable through these weird systems. So, speaking of weird systems, let's go ahead and quickly talk about the 3x3 grid before I forget. So, the 3x3 grid was a way to it was an attempt to expand on the old 3x2. And in fact, there's a reason that we see the old 3x2 used in Unicorn. Because this actually presents a bunch of new problems that I have a feeling that they were trying to find a way around. Like, they were trying to make stuff work with this system. The way that this works is, again, 3x3, you have a back row, middle row, front row, right? In practice, it's supposed to be that, maybe you find different defensive kind of formations for different situations, or maybe you can ambush enemies from behind and get a big opening because they didn't fill out all their slots or something, right? On paper, this is really cool. The whole directional mechanic, like units will face particular directions in this game, it's cool in premise. It's a little awkward in its implementation because actually redirecting a unit to be able to hit them from the back is kind of awkward. Funnily enough, the main mechanic, the Legion mechanic, that's supposed to take advantage of these particular directional attacks oftentimes ends up making the problem worse for your own units. And additionally, when it came to heavy units, they were given this restriction that you can kind of see on the screen right here, where they'll actually dip into a sort of bigger square of their own on the tiles in question, preventing smaller units from standing nearby them. This was more of just an interesting quirk more than something that came up mechanically that often. It was just kind of a way to, I guess, force people to spread out their parties a bit more, because the standard kind of party loadout back in March of the Black Queen was that you would have a couple of heavies up front and an AoE caster in the back, and then hopefully those heavies could soak for them. Anyway, so with that being said, there's a lot of mechanics to discuss with this game, so I'm going to quickly go over. I was trying to find my original save files from a little while ago. Unfortunately, too many computer switches happened in the meantime, so essentially I'm just going to use the video of one of my old challenge runs from back then, and then we'll go from there. And the kind of scuffy setup here, like I said, I just want to use one of my old videos here as a way to hopefully convey some of these mechanics, since I don't have those old save files anymore, which is a bit of a bummer, but it is what it is. So we're going to start off with looking at this absolute piece of art. Yes, we had to, of course, reference the death chicken. It's just one of those feelings that's extremely unique to Ogre Battle 64 to have multiple squad wipes to a single chicken. Anyway, let's go ahead and start looking over stuff here. If you're wondering why we got a Braveheart Wizard over here, there's a guy that we got like the Freedom Wizard in early game OB64, but specifically the reason that I wanted to show this was the Skulltopus icon over here, as we've taken to calling it. So the Skulltopus is basically just the indication that a squad has its leader killed. Now the reason that we're starting there is because in the Ogre Battle games, if a squad leader is taken out, they are essentially decapitated. You no longer have control over them unless you swap out to another suitable commander. Depending on what classes are in the squad, it may not be possible for anyone to lead them anymore, and essentially cutting off leadership was an important mechanic in these games. It doesn't seem like that's a thing in Unicorn so far anyway. It seems like they're just kind of still staying cohesive. Now, this is one of those things where I would initially have thought that it would be more of an issue, but I don't think it'll actually be that much of a problem. See, this had different contexts in March of the Black Queen as well as Ogre Battle 64. Over in Black Queen, this essentially meant that the squad was just sort of taken out. If you had another viable leader, you swap them out, and then they're just basically good to go. You get to the nearest temple, everybody's back up to functioning order. But on the flip side, if you are in Ogre Battle 64, if they don't have another viable commander, there's a non-zero chance that they are getting completely taken out of the fight entirely. Because that if that commander gets back to base and they're not swapped out with somebody else and then have their butt dragged back over to a witch to be restored, there is a chance that they will zombify at the end of the fight. So zombification, permadeath, all of that kind of thing was a mechanic in OB64. So far, it doesn't seem like that's a thing in Unicorn, which honestly I'm okay with. As much as I love seeing permadeath mechanics in games, in a format like this, it can be really awkward to bring permadeath in. But let's go ahead and go over a few other mechanics here just to show this off here. So originally, you may notice a lot of items that may on paper sound somewhat familiar to the stuff that you saw in Unicorn. You still have your full party heals, your single heals, the quick gate is basically the conveyance stone, as well as a few items that you can carry around for the purpose of modifying your units. These became just full-blown accessories for parties in Unicorn. In 64's case, there were actually limits for each unit that determined their carry limit of items they could carry. On paper, this is cool. Like, this is one of those things where you look at it and it's like, oh man, I'm going to do so much with this. And then you start using it and it's like, wow, this is really annoying to get all of my inventories filled back up again. Which, I mean, to me, it feels like it's kind of one of those no-dog kind of things. However, I really like the way that they just simply said, here's a hard limit over the amount of items that you can carry in Unicorn. Here's just a hard limit of how many points you get, how many characters you can bring, how many items you can use, and then here's ways to potentially restore those in the middle of a fight. Those feel really good to me, because as much as I love personal inventory systems, due to the large number of units and everything else, it got to be really annoying to manage. And this is why I keep saying that, yeah, it seems like they definitely had a lot of experience with these old games, that they changed all of these systems in a way that still kept the limit that you would realistically need to get through any fight. Back in March of the Black Queen, you could use as many items as you wanted, which tended to lead to a case where you could basically item cheese your way through fights with absolutely like reckless abandon. There was what I like to call the Joker cannon approach, where those tarot cards, you actually could show up to a shop. Like one of my favorite cheese this March of the Black Queen was the fact that you could stay in a single map, accepting a loss to your reputation for each day that you stayed there, getting paid for each day that you stayed there. You know, it's one of those big simulation aspects that this series loves. But you would keep getting paid every day, and you have a minimum that your reputation can do. So at the start of the game, you can just like go into the first map, basically your tutorial, and sit there collecting free money for as long as you want. So normally the way that you do is you'd play this on emulator like a sensible person, and you'd put it on fast forward. I'm talking about March of the Black Queen right now, just so you know, not 64. 64 has its own infinite money cheese, but anyways, in March of the Black Queen's case, you could just basically leave it running on fast forward and collect free money for pretty much forever. So you start off with infinite money. Then you get an item that allows you to summon Anywhere Jack, essentially a merchant that you can summon anytime that you'd like in the middle of a fight. But there's no item limit, so you can buy an item called the Joker Tarot from him, because these tarot cards allow you to use spells in the middle of fights. There's no limit aside from the fact that you can use them one per action that happens during the fights, like per every tick, and several of them cause damage. So what you can do is buy several stacks of 99 Joker Tarots, and then just basically literally summon down gods. Okay, we got interrupted by a random ad because, of course. Anyway, so you literally can just summon down friggin' Thor 12 times in a row to go delete a boss for you. It did mess up your party experience and things like that, but honestly, it was hilarious to pull off. It made speedrunning a lot of things really funny. Anyhow. So it had a lot of potential cheese that could happen from those infinite items. But I just wanted to point out that, yeah, hard item limits are just a thing of beauty in my eyes. But you might have noticed when we were in that party menu, there were a lot of cases where there were kind of grayed out grids where we could place particular units next to some of the commanders. And additionally, you might have noticed that they mentioned something called a legion. So this was something very important to Ogre Battle 64. That is to say, design-wise, it loved this mechanic, but balance-wise, it basically shot it in the face. So let's talk about it. So here's the general layout. You can deploy 8 squads at any given time in Ogre Battle 64. Unlike March of the Black Queen, you don't have to spend money. You can just deploy as many squads as you'd like. As they go over distances and as they get into fights, they get tired. That's that little flag that's filling up with red at the bottom. And when it fills up, about 70% of the way, they start taking big debuffs to their combat status. Think the kind of tired state in Unicorn. That's basically what they get at that point. And when they're asleep, the enemy has the ability to get one attack off them, aka the first strike bonus. So basically, you see a combination of both of those effects in the tired state in Unicorn. But what the Legion mechanic does was that certain units would be given the opportunity to lead legions of up to 4 other squads in a certain tight formation. So like the ones over there on the top right are doing like a V shape with theirs, and they could extend it out to more squads. With ours, we'll occasionally be using them in some cases, but for the most part we didn't end up using this mechanic. But effectively, they will try to follow that formation as much as they can. On paper, the way it's supposed to work is that it allows you to envelop an enemy squad, attack them from the sides, attack them from the back, all of that kind of thing. So like if you put a weak squad over on one of your sides, they would attempt to attack them, and then using the soldiers that are in your primary lead squad, hopefully led by your centurions or other commanders, they would then give them a technical win, which would then launch them back first into one of your other stronger squads, which should allow them to quickly kind of saw through the party. In theory, that's how it's supposed to work. In practice, it's just a really awkward way to use up your entire deploy limit. But yeah. it's very fun to tear apart. It's really fun to tear into one of these legions, but it doesn't really give them that much of a benefit, because a single strong squad can just very quickly have a far easier time reaching their sides, because legions are very slow to turn around, so they are basically exacerbating the problem that they're meant to solve. Also, just like back on March of the Black Queen, when you see that these guys are going and just taking instant actions here, this is because we have animations turned off. Obviously, there are animations, it's just you have so many fights back-to-back that you're going to be skipping a lot of them. Anyway, okay, so let's talk more about those legions, because they have two aspects that that also are kind of elegantly brought back in Unicorn. For one thing, we have the support actions. So, like, whenever a fight is happening, whenever they send... whenever somebody attacks one of the members of the Legion, the actual commander of the Legion will be able to send in their generic soldiers to go assist. See, the commander of the squad, in order to have that up to 5 party limit, has to equip these guys, who are just generic soldiers. Generic soldiers are kind of a non-renewable resource that you will get over time. Every time you win a fight, instead of getting like you'd get honors, right, in Unicorn, in this one you get soldiers. So your soldiers are then attached to other squads, and every time that they gain a win, they gain 1 experience per unit that's in that squad. Once they get to about 25 or so, they will become a basically level 1 rookie of a fighter or Amazon. Those are your standard male and female classes. So legions have to do stuff like this one right here. This is a Centurion with her 2 soldier squads. They are terrible at fighting, but as you saw, both of their attacks activated at the same time. Combination attacks as well as assist attacks were a mechanic in this game that were really fun in theory. So, okay, so a bit of an unfortunate thing on this. The combination attacks would be a really cool idea. Like, you've got really cool cases where, like, you can't get a Baldur Golem normally. But if there's a Metal Golem, and you get, let's say, a Fire Wizard, and you get a Lightning Wizard, and they make a Fire Lightning Storm, they combine their abilities together, and they hit that guy, and it goes and it forges him into a Baldur Golem. That's such a cool way to upgrade your enemy units. Because the AI can't do it to you. There's cases where, like, you get a mummy, right? Actually, no, I think it was it an undead that turns into a mummy if you create like a dust storm or something. There's all kinds of weird effects that can happen, just like different combination attacks with different units. In theory, very cool idea, very Phantasy Star 4 of them, actually, but it very rarely gets to see much use. However, if anybody ever discovers that they have 2 Sphinxes in their team, and that team happens to have really good synergy, they've just discovered a free win button for basically everything. The thing was, there was a very Ogre series thing that happened with Ogre Battle 64, in that they had all these mechanics and then they told you nothing about them. So, like, for example, there's a hidden synergy mechanic behind every one of your squads. You see this directly in Unicorn Overlord, but the synergy mechanic will determine how often they will do combination attacks. So if units of the same kind that have applicable attacks, which as far as I'm aware are like some of the monster units as well as these basic soldiers, and they happen to be in the same row, they can go and combine their attacks into one potentially stronger thing. Most of the time, it was just kind of an animation difference, but occasionally you'd see something cool come out of it. Unfortunately, yeah, they couldn't quite balance it out in time for release, so it was kind of janky. Though that being said, there are so many moving parts that even when the fan community was making a mod called Hammer to Fall for this one, as far as I'm aware, I don't know if they actually did manage to make the Legion mechanic fully balanced, but I heard it had gotten some good progress, so at least it's something. Additionally, there were a lot of units that simply had ideas, but those ideas were kind of awkward. Like, the reason that this mosquito challenge was a thing was simply because fairies are kind of a meme unit throughout the entire series here, where the fairy just provides a small buff of basically the equivalent of temporarily leveling somebody up twice per fight. Sounds cool in theory, except for the fact that they really can't do much else. So they're throwing out kisses for like 3 health worth of healing and a tiny buff, and they are healing themselves with their own 3 healing. So this sort of became a de facto solo run with extra steps. Anyway, so yeah, lots of cool mechanics, but this Legion thing, the reason that it was cool, though, kind of one interesting use case for it, was the fact that you could swap people around. Like, if you changed formations in the middle of a fight, like, let's say you had a V formation, right? And you wanted to move somebody around very quickly, and you switched that, the direction of that V, or you switched over to a zigzag or something along those lines, you would be able to have them very quickly go faster than they normally can into those new positions. And what's interesting about this is that it actually is exactly like the swap mechanic. Actually, the swap mechanic is a direct improvement of this whole idea, where you have everybody travel along as a little bubble of units, and they can swap out for each other whenever needed. Essentially, this is decomplicating a potentially really cool system into the cool system that it wanted to be the whole time. Again, there's a reason that many of us old Ogre fans are really excited about this whole thing, so that's just really fun to see there. Also, one more thing that I'm just really excited to see in the future, if we can show it here somewhere. Let's go ahead and talk about the Death Chicken encounter. So notice the look of the map. There's a reason that I said earlier that it looks very similar to that particular location, and you know, now that I think about it, I always remembered them coming from the right side, but I guess they do come from the left, almost exactly where that one that one party is, the Ishtania encounter. Yeah, the Death Chicken encounter is fascinating, because basically anybody that can be hit by debuffs, which interestingly enough, the basic soldiers are immune to a lot of debuffs, but basically these two chickens are something of a funny thing, that you'll get partway through the fight and suddenly just get rushed by this absolute unit of a squad that can pretty much squad wipe anybody that they run into with a debuff that there's almost no answer to. See, with Petrification, in the early Ogre Battle games, Petrification lasted forever, which meant that you could depetrify them at a low cost, but at the end of the fight, they will just be considered dead, and there's a non-zero chance that they will simply be just zombified at the end of the battle, right? So every party that runs into this mess will usually end up getting completely just kind of shut down and then wiped. Now, the funny part is, there's a lot of encounters like this, from things like them sending Hawkmen out to go capture your headquarters partway through the fight, or even starting off with a Hawkman behind your HQ, or the Death Chicken encounter. There's a lot of these things that the AI will do to just completely screw you over. As you may notice here, in this particular case, we just got completely, like, pretty much everybody's dead. Like, they just took out everybody. And I believe this was actually when Leia ended up dying permanently over the course of this run here. Which actually, one interesting thing that 64 did that so far Unicorn doesn't seem to be able to do, but in the Ogre games, even your named characters are capable of dying permanently for story reasons in the middle of fights. So if something happens to them, the game just sort of adapts. Anyway, so these kind of troll encounters are a very, very Ogre 64 thing. There are so many cases where you can look at old reviews of people coming in and trying 64 for the first time after liking the rest of the series and finding they're like, oh man, I expected this one thing, and then the game just keeps throwing bullshit at me, like throwing Hawkman that I can't possibly counter at my base, or trying to basically surround me with debuffs so badly that I can't even move. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of that. It's essentially, this game is one of those ones that really loved to laugh at you in the background, where you'll have cases that you'll have squads that are just kind of immune to your attacks, or potentially will be something that you're not ready to deal with, and they want you to figure out those problems. And in Unicorn's case, I'm loving that they're not shying away from that, because especially with the fluidity of its systems there, like in 64's case, it's in the way that it kind of translated to many people was due to the awkwardness of a lot of its menus and systems and things like that. There were cases when you may not necessarily have had the kind of I guess mental bandwidth to be able to actually deal with these guys, because by the time that you actually figured out where to get to those options in the menu, you may not understand the kind of overall function of what those abilities were. You may not know how to get them to where they need to go. And having that new skill system, still having those options directly spelled out to you on equipment, in Unicorn's case, it's a really great way to take the fact that these mechanics can be frustrating and turn them into something that you actually want to figure out. To turn them into a puzzle that you're figuring out in real time, So that kind of stuff feels fantastic. So the strategic importance of a lot of these sort of kind of trick maneuvers here are that it constantly keeps you on your toes and it causes you to keep some units in reserve. And that's really important for a format like this, where, for example, in 64's case, as you see right here, this encounter is very difficult, but all you have to do is hold these guys at bay. If you can find a way to keep these guys at bay, which you technically can get an anti-petrification shield for this up to this point, and the Phalanx is potentially a unit that can deal with the magic attacks from that Freya pretty well. Potentially just Troy by himself, under the right circumstances, might be really good at dealing with that encounter. That he might be able to hard counter it. And on paper, that's supposed to be a fun strategic problem. In Unicorn's case, they basically give you all that information right there, so it allows you to kind of process everything and know what's going to affect what, know how to counter things a bit more directly. So I'm hoping to see this kind of format of strategy game actually get a lot more appreciation there. Because for those that stuck with it, they got to experience a really cool, just like 5D puzzle, basically. Like, it's just, you're considering time, you're considering distance, you're considering the units in question, all their skills, all their equipment, and you're combining that all in this like little microsecond focus of different ideas that you're doing. So I'm hoping that, again, that we'll see more of that there. But yeah, having that information more spelled out to you does allow for focusing in on these things a lot more. Okay, so this is actually another one of those things that I kind of hope they bring back. We haven't seen any evidence to it just yet. But 64 had this birthday mechanic where you essentially got a bunch of different items for making it a certain amount of time. So over time, you were paying for your training, you were paying for all kinds of different upgrades, but your birthdays were free, and they oftentimes gave you very specific items that you couldn't get other ways. Like, for example, the Gallant doll over here. It was a case where the Enchanter is one of those classes that's very subject to the equipment that they get. They're an artificer in all things. So, for example, you give them a spell book, they'll go use the spells from that spell book. You give them the right kind of doll, they may be able to use some different kinds of spells from it, but their primary weapon being this doll, it gives them the unique property of being able to use this Gallant doll, which is basically a doppelganger of your main character, which means that for one of your birthdays, you get a creepy doll of your main character. He's kind of awkward about it, but you give it to one of your enchanters, and they're able to use the main character's stats now. So I'm hoping we see little weirdness like that come up as well. We haven't really seen any birthday mechanic as far as I'm aware. We'll see if that ends up coming up. What's funny is how cheesable this was. I will say, in Unicorn's case, to their credit, they seemingly have done a fantastic job in eliminating cheese strategies and keeping the kind of important stuff intact. Where, like, you'll notice in... I'm hoping we'll see it in this video if it's the right clip that I'm thinking of. We'll notice situations where we're actually able to potentially cheese the fact that you can get leaders and your own squads pinned against walls and things like that to be able to go take repeated attacks and whatnot. That managed to carry over, but it's so difficult to potentially pull off in some cases that it's not necessarily a problem. However, in this particular case, having your experience limited by how much money you have is cool for balance, but also might potentially turn people off because it gives that kind of mental anxiety of not knowing when you're potentially spending stuff that you can't afford to spend, when you're maybe over-investing in one particular unit. So they've actually seemingly gone ahead and with how counters seem to matter more than levels in Unicorn's case, they seem to have dealt with that little anxiety. There's a lot of little kind of like mental anxiety moments that can come from this genre. So it felt like that was dealt with right there, with knowing or not knowing what piece of equipment to use when and where. Again, that's all spelled out for you right away. Like, you literally could lock yourself out of promotions out of your standard units if you sold all your trash equipment in this game. Like, if you sold all of your chainmail, you're not getting soldiers anymore. It's just not a thing. You have to have chainmail for them to wear, otherwise they can't promote into a new unit. So you're just forever stuck with trash soldiers and things like that. Okay. It turned out to be in a totally different video, but let's go ahead and look at it right here. What I was saying about the wall mechanics, just how similar this potentially looks. Like, this is more zoomed in, sure, but we'll see. Again, completely wiped for God even knows how many times here. Anyway, it's like, as you can see here, we're just fighting below the walls, and I really hope that we get to see more of those wall mechanics. Actually, one of the few extraordinarily minor gripes I've had with Unicorn so far is that you can't zoom in any further, though that being said, just how big some of the maps were in the demo, oh man, some of them fights are going to be ginormous, aren't they? So yeah, I'm expecting like March of the Black Queen scale, where you've got just units just absolutely everywhere, having fights every microsecond. I can't wait, dude. I cannot wait. But yeah, those wall mechanics feel very similar here. Where you've got like gates to go batter down, and you've got people going and taking different sections of this city. Funnily enough, this was actually where the Iron Man run of the entire Ogre series ended up ending, somewhere in here, because there was a random chicken squad that pops out of out of a mob of other units. And just ended up getting wiped while staring at a bird out the window. Oh man, I wasn't about to go restart. I was like, you know what, close enough. If I hadn't gotten distracted by a bird only to get killed by another bird, just finally prove that they're working in tandem, then yeah, then it would have been a win. Okay, so yeah, wall mechanics look very similar. The way that the fights kind of feel with their back and forth feels very similar. The bouncing back and forth, it's strange how they managed to exactly nail that feeling. One thing that we actually don't see, which was kind of a surprise, is that we don't actually see the weapons out on the field, which I guess for art's sake would have been a little bit difficult to get in there. Honestly, I'm kind of okay with it, mostly because they probably would have had to redo cutscenes for weird-looking weapons or things like that. Which actually, even in this, I guess even in this case where they show them in the fights, they always have their standard weapons in cutscenes. So I guess that's technically a thing too. Because, I mean, obviously that kind of stuff is always awkward to implement. Because it's like, oh, we have this one cutscene where you're supposed to be threatening somebody with a sword, except they now have a slightly bigger sword, and now it just looks like they're cleaving their head clean off. You know, that kind of stuff. So I don't think that's ever... I guess technically Tactics Ogre Reborn kind of sorta had that, where they were able to kind of make that work, but only in some cases. Like Tactics Ogre PSP and Reborn, there were some cases where they had their stuff in cutscenes, but it specifically was only if they spawned with that equipment, so there's a lot of asterisks to that particular one. Okay, so a weird thing here. So as far as custom names go, you actually could custom name every single unit whenever you wanted in this version, or in 64. However, back in March of the Black Queen, you couldn't rename anyone, and in many ways it feels like a March of the Black Queen thing. Now, originally, to me, this seemed like a bad thing, because I liked my stupid custom names. I like to give them dumb meme names and things like that. But then I started thinking about it. It's like, I have spent, I don't even know how many hours sitting on Reborn's renaming screens, giving people stupid names, right? I constantly kept thinking of, you know, just like dumb names to give to somebody, trying to think of some dumb pun or whatever else, and, you know, wind up with like Fridge Adventure, the Octopus, and stuff like that. But then, that being said, whenever I was going and making units, it was just like, pick some growths, pick some colors, and just pick a name off the list and you're good to go. It felt like the flow was very natural there, and more and more it's kind of starting to grow on me as like, I get why they did that. Yeah, it technically takes away some customization, but I almost feel like... It almost feels like one of those weird cases where it's like a lack of customization actually ends up sort of giving them more, I guess, agency as a character, if that makes sense. Also, one more thing you might notice here, the Pendra system is... So the Pendra system was a one-off for Ogre Battle 64. The cards didn't make it to 64. This just isn't a thing you do. Pretty much the fights are entirely automated in this one. But you had the Pendras, which were basically elemental nukes that you could have, I believe, up to 6 of, that would charge up over time, and then you could just basically press the win button. For better or worse. I wouldn't say that it was necessarily the most elegant execution of all that stuff. Like he says right there, you know, this guy's actually using one of the Pendras himself. But it was a little bit of an awkward system because you rarely actually saw them get used by the AI, if ever. Although you were just kind of given one at the very start like it was nothing. Also, timing was an important part of that Pendra system because you actually couldn't activate it until the fight had gone on for 3 rounds. And this feels like where we got some of that implementation of the point system for Unicorn. because some of those fights lasting a longer time can happen courtesy of those points. And you see more and more expansion over how many times those points can activate, can be restored by certain abilities and things like that. It kind of felt like a mental similar segue to the way that the round system worked in this one, where you ended up unlocking the ability to use some of your higher end abilities as you got more attacks on your units and as you found ways to essentially delay the fight more and more. So things like having more units with triple attacks or having more units with longer animation times actually ended up being a good thing here. So yeah. It was interesting. I personally prefer the way that the Unicorn handled this particular one because of like the point system just feels like there's so much stuff that could be going well with that. But yeah, in this particular case, I think I was expecting to restart the stream because I had I dropped a save state here expecting to restart it by the looks of it because it was disconnecting. Oh man, that happened a lot during the old streams. Let's see, what am I forgetting here? I know I'm forgetting something. Alright, just a moment. Okay, actually, this was another thing that we haven't really seen come back for Unicorn, but the old briefings. So before every map, you would get a briefing from Hugo. He would usually go out of his way to point out where the bridges were, as well as where all the towns were, as well as give you the sort of dev-intended approach to the fight. And oftentimes, you could go completely out of your way to do different stuff. In this case, they seem to have started off this way for the very beginning, like they seem to give you the intro this way. And what's interesting is that they actually have those Joseph's briefings that happened that kind of felt somewhat similar here to a lot of the tutorials from 64. But yeah, like within fights, most of the time folks would just skip over this because it's like, yeah, I can look at the map at any time. Thank you, old man. Can I get back to killing? But yeah, actually, I think this is one of the few times he didn't point out a bridge. I forget if I brought that up during the stream there. But usually he goes out of his way to bring them up. But yeah, those briefings were just a cool aspect of this one. Yeah, here's what those Pendras ended up looking like, that it usually was literally just a delete button. Yeah, he ends up getting put to sleep. We have one more Pendra ready to go. They end up dark questing here. They throw out one more wind, and was this the... no, it wasn't the wipe. But yeah, you could very quickly get your units taken out by that dark quest move. So, specifically, one of the combination attacks that could happen is if that particular kind of unit, that Sphinx, ended up being put in a position where they were paired up with another Sphinx and they got a team-up attack, that basically was an AoE that could dang near insta-kill anything in the game. As far as I'm aware, there was one hidden level that had that, so expect to see hidden levels make a comeback, I'm almost certain. But actually, what I was originally looking for here was the age mechanic. I was sure that I talked about it here somewhere. But yeah, units would age up as time went on. That's where I was going out with those birthday gifts earlier. Here it was. Actually, I think it was over here somewhere. Alright, got interrupted by an ad, but the birthday thing in this case led to a funny situation where oftentimes you would end a save file with everybody at 99 years old, and one of the funny things was the fact that your units would actually comment on all this stuff. Like, they had a cutscene that you could go watch every time that you had a birthday, up to 100 years old. And the funny part was that, yeah, after a little while, they would just show up to the meetings like, what are we even doing here? This war has dragged on forever. How are we still here? Like, they just start losing all hope and kind of calling you out for taking way too long. Like, somewhere in like year 30 or 40, they're like, yeah, look, we've let this get completely out of hand. This is just too much. And then, yeah, past 50 or so, they're like, this is on you. You messed up. We shouldn't even be here anymore. Why have you done this? I wonder if we'll see one of those scenes here. But man, it's like one of those beautiful touches, and I'm really curious to see whether we'll see some of that come up, because we know the timing mechanics are a thing. I really hope that we'll get to see you getting called out for trying to manipulate the game systems. Okay. I'm hoping you get the general idea over why so many of us Ogre fans are so excited to see this stuff make a comeback. In fact, when we were looking at the map earlier, right? So you may have noticed earlier when I said that they just took the map and made it happen. What did I mean by that? Okay, so the map is probably one of the most beautiful things in this thing, I find, okay? Because we've got this friggin' gigantic map, right? Big old open world kind of thing. But is it really so different from from Zenobia or Palatinus in the past here? Because you still have all of this stuff. You can still go over and travel into that place by selecting it on a map. But also, instead of specifically having to know, like, who's in what town, visiting each town individually or whatever else, the important people just hang out outside of that town. If you go over and mouse over those facilities in the world map, it tells you what's in there. It tells you what's important. It tells you, like, who you can hire, what items you can get. It gives you the importance of specific items being in specific locations, but it doesn't lock classes behind them. It gives you things like certain classes coming from certain locations, but it, again, doesn't completely lock you out of having those things. Like, sometimes it's just regional variants. Like, you get your lady soldiers in one place, but you may get your standard soldiers or your guy soldiers in another place. Where you have regular old clerics over here by the church, and then you have your plague mask clerics over here somewhere, right? Like, just the fact that it gives you all of this information right up here feels like they took the old map and just let you live in it instead of just having you go and select a bunch of menus, It took the menu and it just went with it. It made it come to life. It made all of this stuff just happen, So yeah, it gives you a way to explore without having to go into each individual map and being like, okay, I gotta go to the town, I gotta go encounter the event where I save random NPC number 3000 over there. Maybe there's a once-in-a-lifetime event that happens over here if I'm here on a specific day to go catch a meteorite that just happened to land, made of a certain type of metal that I need to go make the Dragoon's armor. But instead of having that be a map thing that you're probably not going to be revisiting, in this case, you're constantly traveling around the map, you're seeing those things happen in real time, and you'll probably be there to see it. You'll probably be there at the right time of day, or, you'll be able to maybe have a much higher chance of actually encountering these cool events in real time. We already know that day-night is a mechanic, and unlike OB64, we're probably going to be seeing a lot more emphasis on day-night rather than specific days. Where we've already seen mechanics where certain units will only be out during the day, certain units only be out during the night, and this again just gives you more replayability as you try to get to those specific things at specific times. Instead of, again, going into specific events to go collect all of these things, to go do additional stuff with your stores, you can go back and see them. Instead of having timed events, like both March of the Black Queen and 64 would have timed events, where certain times you would go back to previous locations, and they would have additional stuff available to you or whatever else. And in this case, the deliveries essentially give you control over that you go to a place and you can expand its facilities, that you don't have to go back and recheck every place. You know when it happened because you made it happen. And I really love the elegance of something like that. Something like having your hidden item shop, instead of being a super out of the way place, being something that you can easily kind of go and get to whenever you'd like. Not only from the fact that you can just select it from the menu, but also the fact that you can go back and just find these guys around in a more obvious manner. Also, I love that the demo has barely been out a week and people already found a way to afford this. It's just funny. But yeah, basically the white cat ear hood feels like it's the princess class from March of the Black Queen. Where it's you get an extra move and you give somebody else an extra move. So back in March of the Black Queen, if you ended up picking up the princess crown, or the dream crown rather, you ended up upgrading one of your Amazons to a princess, and this would give an additional action to everyone on the team, and they typically would also attack twice. So it's just kind of cool to see that, and also due to shenanigans, they were almost always attacking first also. So to me, this feels like the dream crown, but you buy it. But yeah, we see so much of this stuff. I mean, actually, wait a minute. Is this what I think it is? Tackle enemies with magic. I mean, the fact that this looks like a trident just makes me think of the Freya from Ogre Battle. Yeah, it is technically this kind of thing, but tell me that's not a trident, dude. It's just great, It's just great stuff. So I'm hoping, again, this little history lesson helped to convey why some of us Ogre Battle weirdos are so excited for this. There's so much to love here. There's so much to look forward to. And as far as I'm concerned, so far, this seems like the Ogre Battle remake that we've been dreaming of for a very long time. They just couldn't legally call it an Ogre Battle. So it's Unicorn Overlord, of course. But yeah, I'll take it anyway. So, y'all have yourselves a good one. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.